Let me introduce you, setting the tone for this conversation. We'll actually deal a very itchy issue, a very profound issue, and that's politics. That's the way we organize ourselves. That's the way we structure power. The way politics produces goods, public goods. That's what we're going to be doing on this panel. That's why we thought that the wording sustainable politics, sustentabilidad política, should be baptized as perhaps one of the missing pillars of sustainable development. And here we have an incredible participation of three top global leaders who have had a very powerful political experience. To start with, a former minister of Ecuador, Yolanda Cacabatze, later a congressman and also former minister at the state level, or secretary at the state level in Brazil, Sao Paulo, Fabio. But today we have the most amazing privilege of having a presidential candidate who actually developed if you want, the election proposal with the values of social inclusion and environmental protection and management in an integrated manner. So Marina is sitting down still because we're going to be, first of all, addressing the global sustainability issues, and we'll be discussing, is it worth to talk about global government or global governance? We're going to be talking about how do we deal with the UN system that was designed after the Second World War, and we still have it, very much structured on the muscle wrestling. Is that being efficient, effective in creating public goods? We're going to be dealing with how to build international regimes for all on a segmented manner. Climate change, biodiversity there, trade on the other hand, CITES, so on, weapons control. Is that being effective to live together on the earth? Is that being effective to consider the vast majorities of population and the benefits of development? We don't know. These are the questions. And in fact, what do we want out of Rio +20? Should we celebrate? Of course, it's always beautiful to celebrate, being together and in that incredible city, in that incredible energy of people. But will we only celebrate? Or do we aim at a new global political milestone? Immediately after that, we'll go to the national levels. How have we been analyzing the effectiveness of social, environmental, and economic sustainability without looking into the way we are organizing politically ourselves? For Marina, the questions are, is the political democracies that we have today in different countries representing the vast majorities, the voices of the people, the voices of the indigenous communities, for example? Or politics is being sequestered by private interest? How can we assure at the national, the local level that power is distributed in such a way that we have checks and balances among ourselves, in such a way that the planetary boundaries become part of the decision making and not subject to arbitrary or discretionary decisions? How do we come up with decisions that vast majorities of societies are included in the considerations? So those are the kinds of questions for Marina. So let's start with one. Let's start with Yolanda. Should we have a milestone? Should we have a celebration in Rio +20? What?
I'm going to stand up.
Please.
Basically because my back is not very well as usual, but you asked so many questions, Pedro, that I have no idea whether we can answer. I can answer them. Maybe I start with a national one, with a national field. And I have several points to make there. One is that unless we understand what is happening at the national level, we cannot pretend to understand the international one. So I think that we need to invest much more in recognizing what the problems are, what the realities are, what the potential is, what the opportunities are at the national level, and then be able to move ahead. And what I see today at the national level are several problems that have to do with politics and policy. And maybe I will focus on the one that touches my heart most, and that is, what are the roles of government, civil society, the private sector, and other sectors of society? Is in this within the last 20 years, since 1990, when we started producing this new dream, sketching it, where we proposed that civil society should be an active part of the construction of a sustainable world, and via participation in the multilateral agencies, participation hand in hand with government, and then going into smaller definition of what do we mean by government and civil society. I remember that in Rio, parliamentarians and mayors were civil society. They were not participating with governments. They had to participate via the Interparliamentary Union. And I don't remember the name of the Global Municipalities movement. So if we don't have clarity what is government and how we have dealt with that, it's very difficult to define where are the knots and bolts, the bottlenecks of the relationship that we have not been able to build at the national level. And I thought we were building it. I thought that at the beginning of 2000, we already had a new society with new forms of communication between government and civil society and the business sector. And I see later on that the doors are closing, that the dialogue is not as fluid anymore, that the constructive dialogue between the different sectors of society is not happening any longer. But it's not only not happening, it's being punished. In several of our countries, north and south and east and west, we see that governments are closing the doors to this opportunity of collaboration and joint efforts. If we look at today, Mexico, Cancun, the governments are very far away from the rest of us. And the rest of us is everybody else. So what is happening in Mexico today is not an accident. It is a reflection that governments are not happy with what we were trying to build before in terms of a fertile dialogue between the different sectors of society. What went wrong? The question is, why has that happened? And I finished with that, Pedro. But I don't have the answers. I maybe leave the questions. Is it that civil society and the private sector pretended to take over government? Question mark. Sometimes it's very difficult to, I have difficulties in responding, depends on several cases around in the region. But in summary, we do need to have clarity at the national level to go into the regional level and then into the multilateral. And the multilateral, of course, needs change, but needs change from the bottom up.
Wonderful. Things happen simultaneously. At the same time, we have people who are thinking of the global governance. Fabio, what would you share with us regarding both the UN system, a future global governance regime that can actually deliver the kind of sustainability public goods that we're all looking for at the global level?
First, I would like to say that we have
It's you.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Hello. Thank you, Yolanda. I love that song,
Sí, está.
If you are. First of all, Pedro, I would like to say that the world has changed in the last 20 years, and we have reasons to be optimistic. That's okay? I have problems with technology. Alô? Alô? Agora está funcionando? It's working. First of all, I think we have to be optimistic because we have many radical changes in the last 20 years. We were discussing in our breakfast that before 92, the civil society has no legitimacy to play a role. And since then, civil society and NGOs are playing a very important role. Then I think we have a completely different awareness about environmental issues and sustainability issues. But the challenge is how can we transform this awareness in political action? And action, in my opinion, is the challenge because we are following this since Rio 92, and it's important to say that I was in Cairo discussing the GEO 5, and a Chinese guy told me it's not Rio plus 10, it's Rio 20 plus, because we have taken into consideration what we learned in the last 20 years. And the world is so different, in my opinion, Pedro, because to talk about integration, global integration, 20 years ago, we have to remember that 20 years ago we have no cellular phones. My first cellular phone was in Rio. It's big, it's very expensive, and now we can connect ourselves through the media, to the new medias, to internet, to cellular phones. And I think what we have to do is to have a clear idea what should be the outcomes of Rio plus 10. Because as you, plus 20, yes. 20 plus. No, I like this idea because we must take into consideration that being here is very difficult. We are completely lost in the scope. You know, the negotiation is very tough. We don't know exactly what's going on, but we are here. And being here, I think it's very important because you have in the agenda climate change, you have in the agenda biodiversity, you have social inclusion in the agenda. Then, Pedro, my opinion, and we are discussing this, is what is important to have in the agenda in Rio Plus 10 or Rio 20 Plus. How to make the synergy. And what should be the main actors in this process? As Yolanda raised, governments are very important, especially in this region, because we fought for democracy, and you know many of us, especially Leonardo and other people, suffered the dictatorship regimes, and democracy is important, and we have to emphasize the importance of democracy, parliaments, but what we have new that we must have not only governments, not only parliaments, but we must be, we must have a vision that civil society can play a role and business can play a role, and scientific community is playing a very important role. The impact of the IPCC report of 2007 was really impressive. You have two moments. You have the moment before the report of IPCC, and now we have a new moment that we have this probably discussion about IPCC, but the IPCC model, in my opinion, was very important because we don't have this in biodiversity issues, but this is an institution that played a very important role. Then, to summarize, first of all, we must use what I called creative imagination. We cannot see the world looking back. We must see the world in the Rio Plus 20, taking into consideration that we must be clear what we want, what will be the outcomes, and the process itself is very important. We made a mistake in Rio 92 because we are not supposed to keep the momentum and to keep the engagement of civil society and the media in the process. Because after Rio 92, you have the first COP of biodiversity, first COP of climate change. We have the Johannesburg meeting that was completely unsuccessful meeting. And in my opinion, we must take into consideration this, what will be the outcomes and what kind of process we have to design to keep the engagement of the society. Because in order to avoid exactly what we are seeing here in this meeting, because after the Copenhagen meeting, that in my opinion it was important, we are here, and here is completely crazy, nobody knows what we are doing here. Even the diplomats, they don't know, they have no idea what they are doing here, And for me the word is creative imagination, thinking about the future and how can we use what we gained in the last 20 years to design the future that we want.
Thank you very much. Marina, sí. Sí. Vamos a, pois, é possível, sim, com você, sim? Então, a pergunta...
Não, deixa ela subir aqui, Pedro.
Como...
Por favor.
Sim. Como fazemos... Com você.
Não posso te agarrar aqui. Vamos sentar. Você vai aqui me agarrar aqui.
Eu vou ficar sentada. Acho que vocês podem ver.
Se não.
So, only to have the question clear, how do we produce politics that includes the vast majorities of the people in the political dynamics, the limits of the environment, and the future generations, satisfying all levels of development? A very broad question, just so you can...
Bem ampla. Bem, Pedro faz uma pergunta bem...
Simples.
E como começou tudo? Mas muito instigante, Fábio, Yolanda, Raquel, enfim, os amigos, alguns aqui, só para mencionar, Oded, Leonardo, enfim, todos vocês que estão aqui. Você vai falar daí, né?
So it's very good to be here, and Pedro is proposing a very provocative question, and she quotes some of the friends, Oded, Fábio, and Leonardo, who are here today.
Acho que pensar a política incluindo as pessoas, as gerações jovens, de forma a envolvê-las com o processo da mudança de modelo de desenvolvimento, com a ideia da sustentabilidade, não é algo que seja fácil, mas eu vou dizer aqui uma coisa que é paradoxal. Não é fácil, mas também não é difícil.
Involving young people and these new actors is not easy, but I'm going to say something that is a paradox. It's not easy, but it's not difficult either.
E por que não é difícil? Uma vez o Leonardo me falou uma frase, enfim, do Victor Hugo, que diz mais ou menos assim: nada é mais poderoso do que uma ideia cujo tempo chegou.
She is quoting Leonardo, who once told her about an idea of Victor Hugo, which says that nothing is more powerful than an idea which time has just arrived, whose time has just arrived.
E as ideias da sustentabilidade, da integração, economia e ecologia, por compreensão, por necessidade, por valores éticos, é uma ideia cujo tempo chegou.
The ideas of sustainability, economy and ecology are ideas whose time has come, has just arrived.
Quando Pedro falou se a política representa as diferentes vozes da sociedade, ou se ela foi sequestrada pelos interesses privados, foi uma boa pergunta.
When Pedro mentioned that is politics representative, or has it been sequestered by private enterprise and civil society? This is a very good question he poses.
Porque a política para essas ideias cujo tempo chegou não é mais a política que pode ser privatizada, segurada por nenhum grupo. Ela vai exigir cada vez mais lideranças multicêntricas para processos multicêntricos.
So these new ideas, when they come into the political arena, it means that they cannot be privatized. Not a single group can be the leader of the process. The leadership will be multi-centric and multi-systemic.
Os problemas são múltiplos, as respostas também. E, obviamente, que as lideranças não vão conseguir concentrar em si mesma todas as respostas.
So the problems are multiple, and so are the responses to these problems. And all of the leaders involved in this process cannot give solutions by themselves. They cannot, by themselves, solve the problems.
Cada vez mais vai ser exigido uma atitude política em que você se dispõe a dividir a autoria, a realização e o reconhecimento daquilo que se faz.
The new way of working will be to work in multiple fronts, and not one single person can be the leader of a process. The processes will be multiple, and many people will be recognized for the efforts We cannot recognize single people in these efforts.
Isso é uma nova política? É uma nova linguagem, uma nova atitude política?
This is a new way of politics. It's a new attitude for doing politics.
E as gerações mais jovens, elas estão muito abertas para isso. Pelo menos foi o que eu senti na minha experiência no Brasil.
I can see that the young generations, they are very open to this new form of politics. This is what I have experienced in Brazil with the young people.
Mas é preciso que tenhamos uma linguagem viva, que não seja uma repetição neurótica das mesmas coisas, que seja capaz de dialogar com os problemas e as soluções reais.
We need a language that is alive, that can really interact with all these multiple processes.
Mais uma vez, repetindo Pedro, ele disse que nós, latino-americanos, gostamos muito de ideias e temos dificuldade com as coisas práticas.
Quoting Pedro here, he said that we Latin Americans like big ideas and concepts, and we have difficulties in developing practical solutions.
Mas é exatamente na experiência brasileira que eu observo uma inflexão em tudo isso. Cada vez mais as pessoas estão se movendo para a direção de quem se dispõe a liderar, não por palavras, mas liderar pelo exemplo.
At least in the Brazilian experience, I can see that there's a move, there's an inflection. People are starting to want to give an example in terms of practical actions. There's a move towards putting things in practice.
É por isso que eu sei que as pessoas que estão aqui são pessoas que lideram pelo exemplo nos seus lugares, nos seus mais diferentes fazeres.
I know that people who are here are leaders who lead by example, by the things that they do in their day-to-day lives.
Então, durante a minha experiência agora no Brasil, na campanha, eu disse que nós iríamos trabalhar com 3 coisas.
In the campaign for the presidential campaign in Brazil, I focused in 3 issues.
Colocando a visão da sustentabilidade, o processo que levaria à sustentabilidade e quais as estruturas, porque em qualquer coisa que se for fazer é preciso que se tenha a visão, o processo e as estruturas.
So these three ideas are the vision of sustainability, the process we need to get towards a sustainable world, and what are the structures needed to get there.
Isso é válido para tudo. Se ficarmos só na visão e esquecermos de um bom processo, nós acabamos inviabilizando coisas e pensamentos que são muito bonitos. Mas também, se ficarmos só na visão e no processo, nós não levamos a consequências práticas aquilo que nós estamos dizendo, que estamos tentando realizar.
So this applies to mostly everything we do in our lives, and so if we just stick to the vision and do not care about the process, we are not going to implement and reach the outputs that we want to.
E os novos sistemas comunicacionais, como disse Fábio, favorecem essa nova atitude política, porque as pessoas podem criar a sua própria audiência.
So this new media that Fabio just mentioned favors this new political attitude because people now can create their own media and communicate.
Eu diria que hoje nós vivemos o contrário do que tivemos nas experiências socialistas autoritárias do Politburo. Hoje a gente vive a experiência da Politnet. A gente pode fazer um alargamento da visão e criar novos processos, trabalhar com novas estruturas no mundo inteiro, integrados pelo novo sistema comunicacional.
So today we live what is the opposite of what happened in the socialist politics of the Politburo. We have the Politnet. I don't know how to translate this. She's a very good poet and creates many new words. But it's the way of doing politics through the internet and using all this social media to make all the ideas, to enlarge the vision of politics. So we are in this moment now.
Isso tem feito com que os governos, e pegando um pouco o que Yolanda falou, tenham se tornado defensivos diante desse poder da sociedade. Eles estão muito defensivos, estão um pouco assustados com a capacidade que a sociedade tem de influenciar determinados processos.
This probably is what made governments become so defensive, because they probably are very scared of the power that people have now in terms of how they can reach out to people.
A sociedade cada vez mais, de forma organizada, em rede e multicêntrica, ela se colocou como um espaço entre os governos e a sociedade, um espaço entre as empresas e a sociedade, um espaço entre grupos, governo e empresas. E isso cria um certo incômodo, porque, de certa forma, a sociedade ocupa um lugar de mediador.
So society is now occupying the space of a mediator. So it is organized in multi-centric ways, and it puts itself in between governments and the rest of society. So this is very powerful.
Esse lugar de mediador político, mediador cultural, não substitui as pessoas, mas favorece um diálogo mais vivo. Eu chamo esses segmentos no Brasil de núcleos vivos da sociedade.
She thinks that this new organization of society favors a very lively politics and dialogue, and civil society as these mediators, political and cultural mediators, are nucleus, are centers or hubs that are alive and doing this whole movement.
Acho que a política, para concluir, para ser viva e ter uma capacidade de trânsito para todos esses desafios, tem que ter, enfim, uma atitude de não querer fazer as coisas para as pessoas, mas com as pessoas.
So politics, to be alive, has a challenge, and the challenge is probably not to do for people, but do with people.
Então, nesse sentido, eu sou otimista com a política. Baixaram as expectativas de Cancún, mas ninguém baixou as emissões e ninguém perguntou para nós se deveriam baixar as expectativas. Então, as nossas expectativas continuam altas, porque as emissões continuam altas.
We still have very high expectations regarding politics and climate, because emissions are still very high, so we have to keep our expectations very high.
Então, a mobilização, a política nessa busca da sustentabilidade econômica, social, ambiental, cultural, é algo que eu acredito profundamente está alinhado com um novo fazer política, uma nova governança que ainda não existe como referência e que está aí sendo criada, não é? E que precisa cada vez mais ganhar forma. No Brasil tentamos fazer isso, eu e Fábio, em um grupo, de uma forma muito particular. E quando todos acreditávamos que seríamos apenas 0, nada com essas ideias que eu falei aqui, surpreendemos com quase 20 milhões de votos.
So this new way of doing politics includes all kinds of areas that have to do with sustainability, social, cultural, environmental, economics, all the areas of sustainability. And they have to be aligned with a new way of doing politics. In Brazil, we try to do politics in this new way. Fabio and I have just had this experience, and to our surprise, we gained a lot more votes than we originally expected to. 20% of the votes of the Brazilian electorate is a lot more than we had expected to get.
Acho que isso é ideia cujo tempo chegou. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. So, a new way of doing politics. Is that what we're going to do in the preparation to Rio Plus 20, in Rio Plus 20 and beyond? How are we going to do it differently? And I would like to open the floor to the audience. 3 questions. The first 3 that put up their arms. Come on. Yeah. Susan, go ahead. Please. Yeah, there's a microphone.
Sustainability, especially moving towards the Earth Summit. My question deals with how we include some of the big corporations in this dialogue, because one thing I see in my practical work is that you can have discussion and dialogue with some of the big companies, for example, with oil companies, with whom I work a lot, but their interests are still often opposed to what we see as environmental sustainability. And it seems that to have political sustainability that leads towards environmental sustainability, what we really need is to also find a way to have a discussion about changing the business model for corporations so that they can be successful in what they do, but also be environmentally sustainable. And I think that this really gets off into the crux of political sustainability, because corporations have so much influence still in the political system.
Susan, can you just pass over the microphone to Ralph and then to... Oops.
Ralph Ashton, this would be directed to Marina Silva and others who want to comment, but I'm wondering whether the nation state and the national level political system has almost abdicated responsibility and a seat at the table of solving these problems. And if that's the case, what are we going to do about finding the right level of fixing global problems?
Yeah, following up on these 2 questions, my question has to do with communities and the commons. In the introduction, Alejandro was talking about the commons at a very large level, like the commons as the underground water reserves and so on and so forth. But there is also locally managed commons that still have a very important role and will have an even more important role in this new phase, such as renewable energy resources, forestries, and so on and so forth. And what we're seeing is a transition into the use of those commons, which excludes the communities that have taken care and have, traditionally been the shepherds over those commons. So the question is, how can we make sure that these voices are heard and strongly, represented in global policy at the sustainable level? Because otherwise, the level of conflict is going to continue growing.
Thank you. Yolanda, you wanted to ask a question to all of us or make a comment. Why don't you start? Yeah, you got the microphone.
In listening to both Marina and Fabio, but also related to the questions you just asked, I think that a very relevant topic for discussion in preparing for Rio, but also in trying to understand what is happening today, is how are we dealing with communication and information? The potential of reporting, of informing, is enormous. I think it's beyond our comprehension and beyond our capacity to manage everything. But the potential, the instrument is there, but we are not communicating. And whenever we see that the power balance has changed, it is because people have learned new things, have understood things that they had no access to before. And that goes from the oil company leader that suddenly discovers what is the real impact in social terms, beyond economic terms, to the political leader at a global level or a national level in understanding that there is going to be someone who pays the bill. But it also has to do with the capacity of society to monitor decision makers, to be vigilant about what's happening. And you don't do that unless you are well informed. or you don't do that well. But there is a niche, a fantastic niche there for us to analyze how are we going to use information and communication instrument tools to improve our capacity to make the right decisions.
Hello.
Habla. There.
My opinion that talking again about the real meeting, I think, Pedro, that there are some changes in our mental model now. I think one change that we must be very flexible about politics and what we have to do. When I talk about flexibility, why I'm talking about this? 25 years ago, I used to be a lawyer of the victims of pollution in Cubatão when we met, and we have problems with children when the children were born without brains. You know, it's impossible to think that we can have any kind of political alliance with some business people. Today, I think what we have to do is to have an open mind and to be able to make some kind of alliances in order to go and to design this new future that we want. This is very new, in my opinion. Very new. If you see 25 years is nothing. But when we talk about politics, most of people think about politics in the parliament. What we are doing here is politics. We have a politician, very well known. We have a retired politician because I lost the election. But in the reality, what we have to do is to be able to make new good politics. When you ask about nations, states, I think we must see the political landscape and see that we must make some alliance with some what I call cosmopolitan business people like you, that is the new President Vetos, Jorge, Oded, Ricardo Young. Civil society that can be, civil society, in my opinion, must be open to understand how is the process of politics, how you negotiate, as you are saying in this breakfast, and how we have alliances with scientific community, how can we work with them. And Pedro, Raquel, we worked together for many years. She talk about Rio. I think in Rio, we must identify leadership, because what we are seeing here in Mexico, I would like to emphasize this again, is lack of leadership. And in Brazil, the Brazilians must understand that they must play a role, and Brazilian government must play a role. We participate in Rio 92. Maurice Strong played a very important role, you remember?
And it's lacking now.
Some kind of, some person like Strong, there is a lack of this kind of leadership. And the country has to play, Manuel, as we are talking. The country must play this role of leadership, because the failure of Cancun is the failure of all community, but is the failure of Mexican government, which were not able to convoke, to put people together, because this is, when we are talking about the next 18, 19 months, you know, the leadership must be played not only in the meeting, but before the meeting, you know. Then, as a Brazilian, I know that Odette will talk afternoon. I think we must design this kind of leadership, and what I think in the role there is a deficit of leadership. Leadership in business, leadership in civil society, and you have very important leaders here. And leadership, in my opinion, as individuals, because individuals can play a role. Yolanda played a very important role at the beginning of the Convention on Biodiversity, when Yolanda was the Secretary Executive of Biodiversity Convention. No? I thought you were. Then, Pedro, I think, again, we must have understand that in this new world, flexibility is very important. We must be able to have some important strategic alliances with the media, because as the media is not here, the meeting is not important. If the media was supposed to be here, probably we will have a different meeting. Then, seeing the future of Rio 20 plus, I think we must design this kind of leadership that we need in order to make this meeting to have a moment.
Fabio, thanks very much. As we don't have that much time, I would really ask Marina to share your views about whatever you want, respond to all the questions, cualquier idea mais enfocado a próximos passos hacia Rio +20. ¿Sí? Por favor.
Bem, da pergunta como os governos estão resolvendo, que me foi feita, eu acho que tem uma equação interessante. Numa boa parte dos problemas, os governos não estão resolvendo, eles estão sendo resolvidos.
That's a tough one to translate. With regard to national governments, how they are responding and solving this equation, I don't think... Is it working now? Está? How governments are solving the equation. So she thinks that they're not solving the equation is being resolved for them.
E como é que eles estão sendo resolvidos? Por exemplo, no caso do Brasil, até Copenhague havia uma resistência muito grande do governo em assumir metas de redução. Houve uma pressão da academia, houve uma pressão das ONGs e das empresas, e a conjuntura política, e o governo mudou de posição. Então, ele não resolveu, ele foi resolvido.
In the case of Brazil, up to Copenhagen, Brazil had no intention of committing to any targets, but society was putting a lot of pressure. The academics, academic community, the NGO community, even companies were putting pressure on the Brazilian government to have targets. So it was not the government who solved the equation, it was solved for the government. The government had to present the targets because of the pressure it was suffering.
Acho que no caso da Rio 90, da Rio +20, é como se tivéssemos me desculpe a metáfora, mas uma sala vazia, um espaço que precisa ser preenchido com algo. E como os governos não estão ainda discutindo o que fazer com esse espaço, há um espaço muito grande para que possamos dar os contornos do que será Rio +20.
With regard to Rio +20, there's an empty room to be filled up. So I think we have an opportunity here, since governments are not working on it, to try to define what's going to be in that room, what's going to be discussed in Rio +20.
E não podemos pensar Rio +20 apenas com a agenda dos últimos 20 anos. Temos que pensar compromissos para os próximos 20 anos também.
And we have to think of Rio +20 not looking backwards with regard to what happened in the past 20 years, but we have to look ahead and think about the next 20 years.
Se foi possível assumir os compromissos que foram assumidos em 92 para uma sociedade muito mais alheia ao que estava acontecendo, isso significa que as gerações futuras, elas terão mais abertura do que a nossa teve para essas questões.
If in 92 it was possible to have all those agreements signed and all those agreements come into place with a society that was not so aware of the problems and issues that at that moment. Now with a society that knows a lot more about what's going on, we might be able to get more ambitious agreements.
Então o desafio é como preservar as coisas que efetivamente avançaram desses últimos 20 anos, como não ser complacente com os erros que foram cometidos e como ter uma agenda que leve a um acordo pensando em novas gerações que terão que ter compromissos e serão muito mais acessíveis do que a nossa foi.
So the challenge is to preserve what has been a success and has worked. We don't have to be complacent or with what has not gone right, but we really have to focus on the new generation and the agenda that makes sense for this new generation.
Marina. Una pregunta. You say that in the case of Brazil, the pressure of civil society and academia and the business sector led the government to take decisions on targets. Isn't that the role of civil society and the organized community to put pressure on the governments for different decisions in the world?
É esse o papel.
Sim, yes, that's the role.
Eu só disse que às vezes os governos não são proativos o suficiente para resolver os problemas. A sociedade faz com que eles tomem uma atitude de resolvê-lo, seja por pressão, ou seja porque se sentem respaldados. Nem sempre é pressão. Isso é a dimensão da sustentabilidade política. Às vezes os governos até gostariam de fazer, mas não têm coragem, porque acham que vão perder popularidade, votos, sei lá o quê, e quando a sociedade sinaliza numa direção, eles acolhem. Eu fico imaginando que o Brasil, com certeza, terá mais abertura para acolher os temas da sustentabilidade daqui para frente.
She thinks yes, and that governments do respond to civil society, not only pressure, but the level of awareness or engagement. But sometimes government even needs to be reassured that civil society isn't that point where it needs those policies to be put in place. So it can be a matter of reaction to some pressure, but it can also be a recognition by government that civil society is living a moment where it is demanding certain measures.
Uma última coisa, acho que o Fábio tem razão quando ele fala de uma liderança, mas eu vejo que vamos precisar de várias lideranças para os vários assuntos, sob pena de reeditarmos o velho modelo de apenas uma liderança para problemas que são tão variados.
I see that Fabio is concerned about leadership, and I agree that is an important issue. But what I see is that we need many leaders to lead different processes. Otherwise, we will be repeating a model of just one leadership, and that is not adequate.
E não temos que ter a ansiedade ou o vício de que estaremos todos juntos ao mesmo tempo nas coisas, em cima de valores duradouros da democracia, da liberdade, da sustentabilidade, da ética na política. A gente pode fazer alianças pontuais que se dissolvem e se encontram mais na frente. Não precisamos o tempo todo ficar juntos como se fôssemos uma manada.
So we don't have to have the anxiety of thinking that we have to be together all the time, working together. We can make compositions and be together in certain points, and then this alliance will dissolve and a new alliance will emerge in another place. So this is the process that she sees as the one that needs to be put in place. We can align here and there, and we don't need to be together all the time as cattle working, living together.
Estar juntos não significa diluir os sonhos e nem eliminar as diferenças. Acho que essa é a riqueza desse nosso tempo.
So being together doesn't mean, if we're not together, doesn't mean we are not dreaming together. So this is the beauty of the time we live.
Many, many thanks to the three of you. I'm sure that there are very many ideas, questions, whatever. Keep them for this afternoon for those who want to come up with 2 or 3 very concrete ideas for Rio Plus 20 and beyond. Let's really celebrate this panel. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Yolanda. And thank you, Raquel, who's been very helpful.